What's up, y'all? We are back with another edition of DNVR Rams Live. As always, I am your host, Justin Michael. If you're listening in live on YouTube, say good morning. Shout out to everybody that's rocking with us. Shout out to everybody that's listening down the line as well. So much love to everybody in Ram Nation. We've got a fun show planned for you this morning. Going to be kind of all over the place, admittedly, but I think it's going to spark a little bit of debate, which is always fun. Obviously, we focused in depth on the 75-72 win over Boise State yesterday. Talked about Jalen Lake's heroics. If you missed it, I also wrote a feature on him, just his resilience, his selflessness. I don't think there are a lot of players like him in the modern era who would have gone from being in the starting lineup as a sophomore, playing every game as a true freshman, to being asked to come off the bench as a junior. I just don't think a lot of guys do that in this age. I think they hit the portal. I think they look for a different opportunity, especially somebody as talented as Jalen Lake, who could have started for about half the teams in the country last year. Instead, he sticks it out, ends up being a really important piece in that NCAA tournament run. Without him, they don't make the big dance. That was one of the things I focused on. Some of his biggest performances came in some of the most pivotal wins of the season for CSU last year. Whether it was scoring 16 with a broken finger against CU, dropping 16 against Nevada twice, but more importantly so in the Mountain West tournament win. If you don't win that game against the top 25 Nevada squad, the Rams are probably left out of the field of the NCAA tournament. They were the last team in. It ended up being so much closer than any of us anticipated, or frankly, it should have been. I don't think it should have been as close as it was, but it's just cool to see a guy like him who's stuck it out, who's been loyal, who's waited for his opportunity to shine, and now in the biggest win of the season thus far, your longest tenured Ram hits a great shot, gets mobbed, pivotal win that keeps CSU in the Mountain West title race. That's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. We're going to set the scene for that matchup with Fresno State. I'm going to give some thoughts on who the front runners for the Mountain West Player of the Year award should be. I think Nique Clifford is firmly in that conversation, if not the front runner. I'll explain why. There's stiff competition this year. As Jared says in the Toyota chat, Donovan Dent of New Mexico has a great candidacy, as does a guy like Tyson Degenhart, Dean Thomas, Ian Martinez. There are some ballers in the league this year. And I'm looking forward to kind of going through it, making Nique's case, talking about who I believe, the most deserving guys are at this stage of the season. A lot can happen between now and March, but Nique has definitely played his way firmly into the conversation. And with the Rams sitting at 6-2 in league play, an opportunity to jump to 8-2 over the first half of the schedule if they can take care of business in some winnable games up here against Air Force and Fresno State. They're right there. And considering that this team was picked 7th in the preseason, the fact that they're in this spot, I think it's pretty cool. And I also think it's a testament to what Nique Clifford is doing in terms of elevating this team. They're getting a lot of key contributions across the board. We just talked about Jalen Lake. Kyan Evans' ascension has been huge. The bench has come into their own. There's a lot of things going right for the Rams right now, but the center of that is Nique Clifford, and him coming back for a 5th year has obviously been huge for CSU. No clue where this team would be without him, but I think it's going to be great for him in the end as well, because I think he's going to make himself a nice little chunk of change before he ultimately gets drafted in the first round this summer. Really fun. I'm looking forward to talking about all that. I did want to just start, before we get into all the Mountain West hoop stuff, I'll give an updated power ranking, all the stuff you're used to. I just wanted to give a couple of thoughts on what we're seeing from Nikola Jokic right now, which is just absurd. I'm a Nuggets fan. I'm a Colorado sports guy through and through. That's our thing at DNVR. We're for all the teams. But what Nikola Jokic is doing right now, just insane. 5th straight game with a triple-double for him last night against the Kings. He had 35 points, 22 rebounds, 17 assists. joins Wilt Chamberlain as the only players in NBA history to record a 35-plus point, 20-plus rebound, and 15-plus assist performance. On a nightly basis, he does things where if he's not the only one that's done it, the only people in the conversation tend to be Wilt Chamberlain, Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, the peak of the peak when it comes to the most talented players that have ever stepped foot on an NBA court. And I'm obviously biased. Nikola Jokic is my personal favorite athlete of all time. I didn't think that anybody would ever be able to even make it a conversation in terms of surpassing John Elway as the greatest professional athlete in the history of Colorado. I've always thought that Joe Sakic deserved more of a case than he seems to get. Right? Or I've always thought that he should get more support based on his case than he has ever gotten. Delivered Denver its first ever championship with the Avs winning the cup. Before that, the back-to-back Super Bowl run for the Broncos. Two-time world champion as a player, won a cup as an executive, very similar to Elway. But obviously what John Elway means in this state's history is on another level. And when we're talking about just pure legacy, I don't know if anybody's ever going to be able to touch Elway, just what he did single-handedly, almost dragging some of those teams to Super Bowls over the years, going out on top back-to-back, and remaining a staple, of the community after he retired, winning another Super Bowl as an executive. Like, there are so many layers that factor into John Elway's legacy and what he means in this state. And, he's up there with the most popular players of all time anywhere, like a Larry Bird in Boston, like Elway in Denver. He is in that type of conversation, MJ in Chicago. But when it comes to pure skill and just being the best at their respective craft, and I think Elway gets shortchanged there too, for the record. In the analytical era, so many of these stat nerds love to go back and be like, well, he only threw for so many yards. Go watch John Elway throw a football all those years and tell me he's not one of the top 5 guys to ever do it. But Nikola Jokic, man, I think he's in the conversation with Michael Jordan, with Wayne Gretzky, with Tiger Woods. When it comes to being that individually dominant at your respective craft, the gap between you and the next person being that significant, I think it's tough to argue with what Jokic is doing. He's got an opportunity to win his 4th MVP. He should already have 4 if Kendrick Perkins didn't start a ridiculous narrative a couple years ago that Jokic's support stemmed from racial bias. It cost Jokic an MVP, legitimately. It did cost him one. He's doing things we've never seen before, and he does it every single night. His longevity is going to be a big factor if he's ever going to be able to surpass Elway. They're going to have to probably win more titles for him to get that credit. That's just how legacy works. He's to a point, statistically speaking, where there's not a whole lot more he can do that I think like elevates his case. It's really about winning rings for anybody that's still skeptical of him at this point. To anybody that doesn't appreciate Jokic's greatness, I don't really know what you're watching out there. I just genuinely believe he is that good at basketball. And I think his individual impact is so significant. What he has done to elevate the Nuggets, who aren't even a playoff team without him, and they're a legitimate contender with him, it's just incredible. It reminds me of what Elway did, in the 80s, dragging so many of those Broncos teams to Super Bowl. I wasn't alive for them, but I know the history. I don't think we will ever see anyone as good at basketball or at any sport, honestly. And that's saying something, considering we've got some pretty damn talented dudes in the state right now, even on top of Jokic, Cale Makar, Nathan McKinnon, Patrick Surtain. I mean, these are incredible athletes. Jokic is on another level. And I honestly think it's going to ruin basketball for me, because we've seen it at the peak. We've seen it played perfectly. Nobody is ever going to compare. It's just incredible what he's doing right now. And if he wins another ring, I honestly might start pounding the table that, like, it's a legitimate debate. Is he as good as Michael Jordan? I didn't think that'd be possible. I never thought that would be possible. what he has done is just amazing. And his ability to lift this team night after night, it's awesome. And honestly, people get tired of it. I don't know if he'll win the MVP because voters get bored with the process. LeBron should have had more MVPs than he had in the 2010s. MJ probably should have been the MVP every single year that he played. But we get bored. We chase storylines. We want to talk about something different. We want to shake it up. I get it. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, an incredible player. If he wins the MVP, that's fine. I'm to the point now where we know Jokic is the best in the world. I don't need an MVP for that to be validated. I would argue that if he's a 3-time MVP now and he's objectively and statistically playing his best season of all time, how would he not be the MVP this year? I think if he continues to go on this absurd run that he's been on of late, he will win it. He's just his numbers are going to be so incredible that they're just going to be too tough to argue outside of maybe OKC just, I don't know, winning like 70 games or something like that. It's just incredible what he's been able to do. And I hope that you appreciate it. And I'm a big proponent of living in the moment and really appreciating what you have because it goes quickly. I think we've witnessed it in CSU with coaches like Sonny Lubick, with players, like Isaiah Stevens. 5 years goes pretty quick. And then you look around and you just realize how differently it is without them. I've just got so much love for Nikola Jokic. That's really all I wanted to do, was come on here and rant about how much I love him for like 10 minutes. I appreciate everybody giving me a second and kind of doing it. But I think it's a good way to segue into the Mountain West Player of the Year conversation, because Nique Clifford's case, very similarly to what Jokic does, and they're different. Like, I'm not saying Nique Clifford is Nikola Jokic. Don't get me wrong. Don't get this twisted. But I think that Jokic's greatest strength, or I think his greatest argument for why he's so amazing, is on top of being individually skilled, statistically the best jump shooter in the NBA right now. I heard Nate Kreckman talking about that on Altitude, better than Kevin Durant, which seems like it should be impossible. Incredible passer, incredible rebounder. Like, he can do everything out there. He elevates everybody on the floor around him. And that Nuggets team, without Nikola Jokic, they aren't a playoff team, let alone a contender. And to see what Nique Clifford has done for CSU this year, a team that was picked 7th, lost all of their leading scoring production, like 7 of their 8 leading guys, basically everyone but Jalen Lake and Nique. It's been awesome to see what he's been able to do. I've talked so much about him not only like taking his game to the next level, but growing as a leader and being a player that not only impacts the game with what he's doing scoring wise, but his ability to facilitate, his ability to elevate everybody else out on the floor. And we're just seeing it. Like, he's making every right pass. He's making every right read. He's the best defensive rebounder in the league. And I know that the competition is stiff. We've got people in the Toyota chat that have brought up Donovan Dent. I think Donovan Dent is incredible. I was arguing last year that Donovan Dent was New Mexico's best player when it's Toppin and Jalen House getting all the love. You could see, like, when Dent was out there, dude's a game changer. And obviously, hit a game winner against CSU, goes coast to coast, just a phenomenal athlete. You can't argue with the stats. I mean, Donovan Dent, he's first in the league in scoring, 18.9 points per game. He's 3rd in minutes. You're being out there consistently. That's a big factor for me. Both Nique and Donovan Dent, top 5 in minutes played. Dent 3rd with 673. Nique just behind him, and with 662, Nique actually averages more minutes per game, but just based on the total minutes they played this year. Donovan Dent 2nd in assists at just under 7, 8th in steals, 1.6, 6th in field goal percentage. To me, some of the most important stats when it comes to the Mountain West Player of the Year, I keep saying Offensive Player of the Year, the Mountain West Player of the Year. I think you've got to be efficient. Obviously, scoring and production are going to be big factors. If you're not putting the ball in the bucket, you're not going to have a very strong case. Both these guys top 5 in scoring. Both these guys top 5 in minutes played. Dent is 2nd in assists. Nique is 2nd in rebounding at 9.6. He's 1st in defensive rebounding. 1 of 2 players in the league to average north of 9 rebounds a game. He's 9th in assists as well, so he's top 10 there. He's 7th in field goal percentage. If you were picking the award today, to me, the logical candidates would be Nique Clifford or Donovan Dent. I think those are the most deserving. It's Jokic for Shea at that point. It's either of those guys. They're both incredible. They're both having good years. They both elevated their teams. Their teams are both having success. New Mexico, better than CSU, having a little bit more team success. You could argue maybe that's why Dent should get it over him. But to me, this is where everybody expected New Mexico to be. They were projected to be one of the front runners in the league, right up there with Boise State. People were higher on Nevada in the preseason than they've ultimately ended up, being. San Diego State, like those were the teams picked to finish atop the conference. And the fact that CSU is here right now after being picked 7th, that they're a legitimate contender 1 game out, I think that's a pretty good case for Nique Clifford, especially when you see like where this team was at in mid-November versus where they're at now. I think CSU is the most improved team. We've seen some other, nice stretches from, Wyoming has had some moments. UNLV has had some moments. But I just think that Nique, he has all of the stats. He's top 5 in every major category. He's a two-way player. He's impactful on both sides of the floor, which you can say about Dent as well. He's top 10 in steals. Nique's a guy who had more steals and blocks last year, but he's still one of the best man-on-man defenders in the league. I just think that if CSU finishes top 3, especially, it's going to be tough to argue against Nique because he's going to be right there in terms of scoring. He's the best rebounder. He's top 10 in assists. His field goal percentage is through the roof. He's shooting the 3 ball well. Like there's nothing he's not doing well right now. And I just think he's the biggest reason that CSU is in this position. Without him, where would this team be? I don't know, but they certainly would not be right there in the mix, 1 game out of first place in the league. Like there are a lot of other good candidates you could point to as well. Tyson Degenhart, he's 3rd in scoring at 18 points a game, just dropped 27 in Moby. We've watched that dude ball out against the Rams for 4 straight years. He's a monster. He's also top 10 in rebounding at 9th, but not as solid as Nique. He is 1st in field goal percentage, but Boise was the preseason favorite. They're basically already out of the mix. I think the lack of team success is going to hurt Degenhart's case. Ian Martinez probably deserves more love than I've given him. He's 4th in the league at 17.1 points per game, tied with Nique. He's 15th in assists at a little over 3. He's 4th in 3-point percentage, 38%. 8th in field goal percentage. One of the best all-around just scorers in the Mountain West, Ian Martinez, and obviously Utah State leads the league. So they have an opportunity. New Mexico, actually, I think, passed them recently. But those two, they're atop the league. They're going to have strong cases. Martinez is great. That said, out of the top candidates, and in my opinion, the top candidates are Nique Clifford, Donovan Dent, Tyson Degenhart, Ian Martinez, Deaton Thomas Jr. of UNLV, and Miles Byrd of San Diego State. He's the only one out of those guys that's played less than 600 minutes this season. Some of that has to do with Utah State being up big in some of those non-conference games. But I do think that should be a factor. Like, how much are you out there on the floor? How consistently are you doing it? He's a great scorer. Utah State's a great team. They've certainly surprised people. He does have a case. But to me, it's Nique Clifford or Donovan Dent. You could throw out somebody like Deaton Thomas Jr. at 15.8 points per game. That's 7th. He's 2nd in minutes at 674, 3rd in assists, 9th in field goal percentage. Very quietly just doing his thing on a night-to-night basis. One of my favorite players in the league. Again, though, UNLV doesn't have the team success. They don't have the consistency for them to be higher up in the conversation. Miles Byrd is incredible. What he did against CSU is insane. A lot of these guys have had good games against CSU. Miles Byrd, 14.3 points per game. That's 12th. But he's also top 5 in blocks and steals and 6th in 3-point percentage. Much like Nique has a strong case as one of the best two-way players in the league. Miles Byrd's incredible. I don't know if he elevates his team quite as much as Clifford or Dent does. Although you could argue, I suppose, that San Diego State as a team this year, not exactly on brand. They don't have the depth top to bottom that they typically do. Where would they be without him? That's probably a fairly strong case. Just need a little bit more scoring, I think, if you're going to be able to pass some of these other guys, because I mean, 6 points a game in a 40-minute college game. That's a pretty big gap between him and guys like Nique and Dent and Degenhart and Martinez. I think there's a lot of really good candidates this year. I think the league is wide open, which is going to make this really interesting. Last year, it was tough to do power rankings because everybody was so good. This year, it feels like there's kind of a steep drop off after, the top couple teams. And then in the middle, it just kind of depends on what night. But we're going to get into all that in just a second. We're going to take a quick break real quick. We're going to shout out some of our partners. Let's start with Toyota, the official vehicle of DNVR, proud partner of CSU Athletics. Trucks have always been a part of their DNA for generations. Toyota has built durable legends destined for greatness, perfect for Colorado. They offer 17 models with available all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive like the Epic 4Runner. They also offer more low and zero-emission vehicles combined than any other automaker to give customers numerous choices to reduce their carbon footprint. 16 hybrid vehicles to choose from, like the Tundra iForce Max hybrid truck. Not to be outdone, Toyota SUVs take command on the road and on the trail, so you can explore the road less traveled without sacrificing smooth city rides. And SUVs like the RAV4 and Grand Highlander. Toyota is a proud partner of CSU Athletics and the official vehicle of DNVR. Toyota, let's go places. When you're going places, when you're cruising in your Toyota, maybe you got the windows down, maybe you're heading to the mountains, maybe you're just cruising around town, whether you're in NoCo, whether you're in Cap Hill, you want to look cool, don't you? So pop on your Shady Rays. Get ready for the season ahead with quality shades built to last. Shady Rays, they're an independent sunglasses company. But what they do is they offer a world-class product that's rated 5 stars by over 300,000 people. Every frame, every style, you name it, they've got it, and they've probably got it in multiple colors. What's awesome about Shady Rays, they've got a little bit of something for everyone. And what's even better, if you find a pair that you love, if you need to exchange them or return them, you can do it risk-free. They've got the best support in the business. Exclusively for our listeners, Shady Rays giving out the best deal of the season. Go to shadyrays.com, use that code DNVR for 35% off polarized sunglasses. Try for yourself the shades rated 5 stars by over 300,000 people. Oh, interesting. We've got some breaking news from Pete Thamel. Significant loss for CSU defense. Wake Forest expected to hire Colorado State linebacker coach Adam Pilapil as the school's new linebackers coach. Served as interim DC for the bowl game. Was expected to be back. That's interesting how that ended up playing out. I thought Wake had already hired a linebacker coach. We'll have to dig into that. Maybe the guy they were targeting fell through. Not shocking, given his relationship with Freddie Banks. That's a big blow, though. He's kind of considered a rising star in the coaching industry. I'll dig more into that and the impact of it, moving forward. It's going to be a much different looking defense next year. We knew that was going to be the case. I don't know if it's the end of the world, given that your scheme is going to change. But that's a tough blow. And I think CSU fans are going to be rooting against Wake Forest pretty intensely the next couple of years. Very interesting. All right, let's get back onto hoops. I don't have enough information available to completely derail the shows to talk about Adam Pilapil at this stage, but that is a significant loss, and we'll certainly write about it. We'll focus on it. I might end up recording another podcast this afternoon. We'll have to see what happens with all of that, but tough break, man. Fucking Wake Forest has been killing CSU this year. Kind of annoying because it's not exactly a dominant program by any means, and you worry about the possibility of some of these young guys that you've recruited that you really like a Cannon Valenzuela, jumping ship down the line. We'll see. I just threw a random name out for the record. I'm not trying to say that Cannon would do that. I don't know. A very high character kid. I liked him a lot. When I had him on the podcast, I think he has a very bright future. That was just somebody that comes to mind. I know they had a great relationship with him. That's always a possibility, Interesting, though. All right, let's talk Fresno State. Big game coming up for CSU, trying to maintain the success that they've had of late. Couple of keys for CSU, and pretty typical of most matchups, but you got to hit your jumpers. Fresno State defensively, they are a team that'll kind of pack it in down low, dare you to shoot at times. Teams tend to put up quite a few 3-point attempts against them. CSU, they've been shooting the ball well, though. I saw some comments, from the Boise State circles about the Rams not being a good 3-point shooting team. They didn't start the year very good, but the numbers of late have been solid. They've averaged 11 made threes per game over the last 5, had 12 or 13 against UNLV. They've had some success shooting the ball, and what's been nice to see is they're not solely dependent on one guy to stretch the floor now. Jalen Lake, Nique Clifford, those are your most consistent weapons from deep, but we've seen Kyan Evans hitting the three ball with a lot of consistency of late. He had 3 made threes in that win over Boise State, including a huge one with a little bit over 3 minutes left. I will say, against a team like Fresno State, at times it could be a bit of a blessing and curse on the road. If you hit a couple early, you might get a little bit complacent. You still got to work the paint. But I do think that 3-point shooting is going to be a pretty big factor in this one. If the Rams can establish a big lead in this one early on, I think there's a good chance they can kind of run them out of the building. I will say you don't want to let Fresno hang around. They've only got 1 win in the league slate. It came over Air Force. Those are the bottom 2 teams in the league. They're not particularly strong on either side of the ball, but you can't overlook anyone. I mean, we saw it the other night. San Diego State should have lost to Air Force, and especially on the road, you just never know. We've seen weird stuff happen. You know, we've seen New Mexico lose at the Pit, but we've also seen them lose. Or we haven't seen New Mexico lose at the Pit very often, but we've seen them go into places like San Jose State and fall. We don't see a team like San Diego State lose at Viejas all that frequently. We see them struggle in Colorado Springs. You just never know. It's not going to be an intense crowd. There's not going to be a lot of buzz in the building. You know, you don't have that energy created for you naturally. You have to kind of generate the will yourself, and that can be a little bit tricky, especially coming off of the emotion of hitting a game winner against a team like Boise State, who you always kind of compete well with. You know, I wouldn't say it's a rivalry, but I do think it's kind of a matchup that's created some intrigue there, just based on the fact that Leon Rice has been around for a long time, and a lot of their players have as well. There've been a lot of good games, you know, back and forth affairs, 6-6 over the last 12 matchups between those 2 schools. That's coming off of Wyoming and San Diego State in the road, where you're going to have a lot of energy naturally, like that. Those are big settings. Fresno, it's the complete opposite of that. Now you're going against 2 teams who nobody cares about, nobody follows. But if you don't show up, man, you can mess around and find out in a 40-minute game. And I just want to see the same locked-in mentality that we saw against Wyoming and Boise State, particularly early on. I think how CSU comes out of the gate in this one will tell us a lot. If they look sluggish, could be one of those where you have to try and grind it out and steal one, similarly to how San Diego State did against Air Force, just hopefully not quite as dramatic as that. But again, I do think if you can establish a big lead, like, they just don't feel like the type of team that's going to have the juice to put a crazy comeback on you. Knock on wood, you never know. But I do think a hot start's important. I think stretching the floor is going to be important. And you got to continue to get production from your bench. You know, Bowen Bourne takes a shot to the face the other night. Only ends up, let's see how many minutes he played in that one. Only ended up playing 5 minutes in that game. Likely going to play more like 10 to 15 in this one. We don't know what the starting lineup is going to be. Didn't have Bemba against Boise State, flu-like symptoms. After missing practice all week, if it is the flu, my guess is he's not going to play Saturday, or maybe he plays a limited off the bench, or maybe he starts the game and just has a minute restriction. I do hope we get to see a little bit more of Nikola Jokic. I thought he was effective during his time on the floor. He looked confident for somebody who's not played a ton this year. And I just think getting him some run is going to be big for his development long term. I mean, you're hoping he's a guy that can be impactful for you the next couple of years. But on top of that, just given that Bemba's been a little bit hard to depend on throughout his career. He's often injured. He gets sick, you know, a couple times a year, it feels like, and misses games. I mean, he's tough, and he makes a major impact for CSU. There's a world in which, like, they just lose him, though, and then you can't be SOL at that point. You played yourself into a position where you have an opportunity to contend. A lot of guys have stepped up. Maybe Japa ends up stepping up down the stretch, and we kind of see him in an increased role as the season goes on. If Bemba is good, if he's healthy, I anticipate that he's the guy they lean on, you know, at the 5. They don't really have a a dominant big on the team. Like Jorgensen's coming along nicely as a freshman, but he's got room to grow, and he's never going to be like a rim protector. He's going to be more of an Avila type skilled guy that can stretch the floor, pass the ball, put it on the floor, do a whole bunch of things offensively, which is what Nico loves in his bigs, and that's why he's always kind of been attracted to those Swiss Army knife types more so than like a true just 7-footer. And it's hard to land 7-footers, first of all, especially ones that are impactful. But I am interested to see what happens with the rotation in this one. Can you get 15 points out of your bench? Anything more than that's gravy. But to me, if you can get 15 points a night out of your bench and you're getting the typical production that you're getting from, Nique and Lake and Kyan and those guys, you're going to win more times than not because the defense has been locked in. They've become a much better rebounding team as the season has gone on. Nique's a big part of that, but I think collectively as a group, they've just embraced that. They've attacked the glass a little bit better than we saw in November and December. But don't beat yourself. Turnovers are the great equalizer. Getting into silly foul trouble, giving them a million opportunities at the free throw line. I thought they picked up some ticky-tacky fouls early in the second half against Boise State, which was a big part of what allowed them to hang around. They went 11 of 11 at the free throw line over the final 20 minutes. Credit to them for hitting those free throws. But I did feel like that's kind of what gave them some confidence and just allowed them to, little by little, break down that lead that CSU had. Things went a little bit stagnant for the Rams offensively, and they had CSU on the ropes, but to the Rams' credit, they were able to always throw that counter punch, which was huge. I'm going to get into my Mountain West power rankings here. I'm going to shout out a couple of other partners real quick, starting with somebody who's been with us since the very beginning, and that is Breckenridge Brewery. Breck Brew is doing an awesome ice deck giveaway. It comes with 2 VIP tickets on the glass, complimentary food and drinks for the Avs Blues game on March 28th. What you want to do is go to breckbrew.com/ice deck. That's breckbrew.com/ice deck to enter. You can also find the link in our show notes. And while you're at it, check out Breck Brew's new West Coast style IPA Ridge Runner. This double dry hop brew is inspired by the untamed beauty of Colorado's trails. It creates notes of bright citrus and pine. Breck, of course, is the official craft beer of DNVR. They've got a beer for any occasion. They've been doing it for over 30 years. Nobody does it better. Check out the Breck Beer Locator at breckbrew.com to find a brew near you. I also want to shout out the homies at Saturday Neon. If you look in the back, they hooked me up with this awesome CSU neon sign. What they are, they're a local company. They make officially licensed collegiate logo LED neon signs. Perfect for office, man cave, basement, you name it. They're light, they're easy to install, and they're affordable. They're only $75, which is awesome. And when you use the code DNVR, you're actually going to get 10% off on top of that. Perfect. If you got, a diehard Ram fan in your life or anything, they've got a bunch of schools. They've got over 50 of the biggest schools in the country at this point. Check out Saturday Neon. Again, go to SaturdayNeon.com. Use that code DNVR for 10% off your order. So much love to those guys. Really appreciate them hooking us up. They've put some great stuff in the DNVR bar, but they also hooked me up for my home studio. They've got, if you want something intense, like you can get the full one that we have in the bar. That bad boy is huge. That thing will start a conversation for sure. And shout out to my guy, Nick Reese in the Toyota chat. He loves his Saturday Neon Ram sign. He'll even let it slide that they're Buffs fans. Every now and then a decent fellow heads over to Boulder and they come out of it. I'll give them some love. They've hooked me up. They've been great to us as a company. They've been great to me personally. So shout out to those guys and shout out to all you. I love hearing when you guys support our partners. One of the best ways to support us is to support our partners, to use those codes, DNVR, let them know you're listening, to let them know you're engaged and about it. So shout out to all you guys. I want to do a Mountain West power ranking. If you guys have got any questions, comments, etc., throw them our way in the Toyota chat. I'll get to them after. Might be a little bit shorter show today because I got to dive into that linebacker news. Of course, thought I was going to get an afternoon off. Never do. All right. Let's start at the bottom. We'll work our way to the top, starting with Air Force. I've got them at 11th. They're 3-16 overall, 0-8 in the league. They should have had San Diego State. They were the better team. Frustrating, man. Frustrating way to go down. I'd argue that San Diego State got away with a moving screen on that last coast-to-coast layup, but it's bad defense on their part. You've got to corral the guy with the ball at that point. You can't just let him go coast to coast and hit that layup. If anything, tackle him once he gets to the rim, like make him earn it at the free throw line, if nothing else. Just a heartbreaking way to go down. Maybe a wake-up call if you're San Diego State, though, because they've kind of been playing with their food all year. They're still going to be tough to beat at Viejas, but looking pretty down at the moment. 10, we got Fresno State, 5-14, 1-7. They do have that win over Air Force. That's about the only reason I would put them above them. I actually think Air Force is a better team. I think Ethan Taylor, Air Force's guard's a better player than anybody on Fresno State's roster. But they do have the win head-to-head. Head-to-head's not always going to be the determining factor. It just kind of depends. These are power rankings, not standings. But in this particular case, when they're more or less the same, we'll give them the slight nod. I've got San Jose State at 9. They're 9-11, 2-6 overall. They're the most frisky team, I would say, out of the bottom fourth of the league. Certainly can't overlook them. They've already pulled some pretty nice wins. I mean, they took down New Mexico, and they've given teams like Boise State a run for their money. They just don't have the horses to last with a lot of the top teams. Wyoming, they're frisky as well, 10-9, 3-5. Home wins over Nevada. They beat UNLV on the road for the first time in like 20 years, which was a nice spot for, or a nice win for them, especially after UNLV had just taken down San Diego State and Utah State. That said, they're so dependent on Agbeam going for like 25 to even have an opportunity to be competitive. He's second in the league in scoring. You know, I talked about the conference player of the year nominees, never mentioned his name because he doesn't have a realistic opportunity to win the award, but he is one of the best scorers in the league. You can't overlook him, that's for certain. I struggled. I put Nevada over Wyoming. If last week it probably would have been flipped. I've got Nevada at 7. They're 11-8, 3-5. They're actually coming off of a rough showing, but they'd looked a little better in the 2-3 games before that. On paper, they have significantly more talent than the 4 teams I've listed below them. Arguably the biggest underperformers in the league so far. But I could see them getting hot. They're a team, like, especially if they can finish the season the right way, and like if they could sneak into like that number 5 spot in the Mountain West tournament and avoid playing day 1, they might be a little bit tricky because they do have some talent. They have not played collectively. They're a weird team. I'm not a big Alfred guy, admittedly. He feels like a classic do less with more type coach, but we'll see how they can respond. I've got UNLV at 6. I love Deaton Thomas Jr. I think Kevin Kruger I think he's the worst coach in the league, to be honest. I did talk about somebody that does less with more. He's certainly in that mix. They frustrate me. They're sloppy. They have like no identity on either side of the ball. They bring in talent and they'll pull off a couple of big wins, but the lack of consistency is just maddening. I doubt that Thomas is back next year, but we'll see. They're 11-8, 5-3. They've got a shot. You know, they're right there in the mix as well. Boise at 5, 13-7, 5-4, up there with Nevada for biggest disappointment in the league this season. Preseason favorites. They've already got 4 league losses. I said yesterday, I think it's going to take 16 wins to take the conference title. That would mean they essentially have to win out to win the league. I just don't see that happening. They haven't been consistent enough. You can make an argument that Cardenas and Degenhart, that's the best 1-2 combo of anybody in the league, and those two are certainly capable of taking Boise on a run, but need to see more from them. I've got San Diego State at 4, 12-5, 5-3. Again, head-to-head, not always the determining factor. They beat CSU pretty good in Viejas. That's to be expected. They've looked awful on the road. New Mexico, Utah State, CSU have looked a lot better away from home than San Diego State has, and that's why I actually jumped San Diego State with CSU up 2 spots from 5th last week, 12-7, 6-2. Taking care of business. They've taken care of business of who they are supposed to beat. They're steadily improving. And I just like if you were looking at a chart, it feels like CSU and San Diego State trending in opposite directions right now. Rams on a steady ascent. not necessarily to the peak yet. San Diego State, they were probably not even going to start as high as they've been in recent years anyways, but it just feels like there's not a lot of room for upward mobility at this point. I think they kind of are who they are. Like, they'll go as far as Bird is able to carry them. They don't have enough offense. They don't. And defensively, while they're tough at home, like, they have these lapses where they just don't feel that locked in. Like we saw Air Force, even getting to the rim on them a couple of times. Weird year for San Diego State. I'm just based on brand and the respect I have for them. I've talked about this too in the past. Like, I almost am more scared of San Diego State in a year where they finished like 5th in the league in the Mountain West tournament than I am when they finish first, because you look up and come Saturday, they're still somehow in the championship game. They get hot and make the tournament. But the guard play has been an issue for me. And I just don't think they're going to have the shooting to outlast some of these other top teams. I've got CSU at 3 right now, 12-7, overall 6-2 in the league, playing good ball. I've got Utah State second, 17-2, 7-1 in the league, and New Mexico at the top, 16-4, 8-1. Utah State is an anomaly. They defy logic. I don't understand how they are able to year after year essentially do a hockey change with their lineup and coaching staff as well, and find a way to keep this rolling. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. I'm so impressed with them. Much like CSU, certainly outperforming the preseason expectations. Ian Martinez is a stud. New Mexico, when they're on, and especially at home, and they won't have that benefit, in the postseason, but when they're on, I just feel like they have a level on both sides of the ball that they can take it to that I'm not sure anybody else can reach. They're so athletic. They can run on you, dense a menace. They hound you defensively. They've got a nice presence in the post. They can stretch the floor. They can be a little bit sloppy at times. They can be a little bit moody. I feel like CSU and Utah State may be a little bit more even-keeled on a night-to-night basis. Does feel like New Mexico, much like what I would say about San Diego State this year, they've just been kind of erratic. It depends on the night. I'm not a huge Richard Pitino guy. I think he brings in talent in terms of his in-game adjustments. Like, I've just never really been that impressed watching how he manages games. But I just think that Donovan Dent's incredible. I think they've been the most consistent team top to bottom. And I think they have a level that I'm not sure anybody else can reach at this point. That said, nobody's untouchable in the league this year. And that's what's going to make it really fun. Like, I think very realistically, any of those top 4 teams could win the regular season conference title. Out on Boise at this point, just because I think it's going to be too hard. And even for CSU, like, if they're realistically going to pull it off, you got to go undefeated at home. You're going to have to steal at least one of the games against Utah State. You've got 3 remaining games between New Mexico and Utah State. You've already lost once to New Mexico. You probably got to go like 2-1 in those 3 to realistically have a shot, just based on how the tiebreakers are going to work out. Unless you get a bunch of help, if one of these teams just falls apart down the stretch, the wheels come totally off or something like that, I guess that could change the conversation. You do have more home games than road games, though, to finish the season. Feels like the growth has been steady. The things they're doing well are sustainable, which is encouraging. It's not just one guy getting fluky hot. A lot of guys right now are playing their best basketball of the season. In some cases, the best basketball of their career. When you look at somebody like Nique Clifford or Jalen Lake, you've got a shot. You're right there in the mix. You've played your way into relevancy, which after that game in Boulder, I did not think was going to be the case, man. That was just awful. CSU just didn't even show up. I mean, it felt a lot like the bowl game, to be honest, for CSU football. Never even showed up, really. But since then, I've been impressed with the fight. I've been impressed with how they've been able to get key contributions from basically the entire lineup across the board, at least the guys that play. And they've ironed out some of the wrinkles that they had in the rotation, which were a major factor with some of the sluggish performances they had in November. So I'm pleasantly intrigued. I'm cautiously optimistic about the future of CSU. I mean, I'm very optimistic about the future as a whole, but I'm cautiously optimistic about this team's potential to maybe make a little bit of noise this year and maybe surprise some folks. I still think it's a an outside shot that they make the NCAA tournament. Like, I wouldn't put all my eggs in that basket, or you're probably going to be disappointed. At this point in time, it's looking like an NIT year, but you never know. If you get hot at the right time, if you can play your way into a nice run in the Mountain West tournament, like, if you win 14 to 15 league games and you at least make the Mountain West title game, you might have a shot there, especially if some metrics kind of even out. I've seen some people post about how UC Riverside is actually having some success. That might end up being a Q3 loss instead of Q4, which would be huge. We'll see. I'm just excited that we're going to have a team that's in the mix, that they're playing relevant games, and that it's not, February 1st and we're already sitting there being like, when is spring ball starting? I'm just excited to see how it all plays out. Kind of feels like we're playing with house money at this point. There were no expectations realistically coming in, and you're right there in the thick of it. Like, you've got a shot to make the NCAA tournament, which is really all you can ask for. If they do play their way into that spot, I think it only elevates Nique's case that much more to why he should be the Mountain West Player of the Year. Nobody expected CSU to be in this spot. Nobody expected him on a national level to make the type of leap that he is. And it's just cool to see. It's been really cool to see. All right, I'm gonna get out of here. I'm gonna dive into that news we have for CSU football, see if I can get a confirmation or not on whether or not Adam Pilapil is gonna be Wake Forest bound. If Thamel's reporting it, I trust his sourcing. But tough blow. We'll talk about it more on the podcast. I'll probably get some written content out as well. But that's all I've got for you guys this morning. Hope everybody is staying safe out there. Stay warm. Sounds like we're going to get some more snow this weekend. Big game, though. Big road game coming up against Fresno State. I'll have a post-game podcast. I'll have written features, takeaways, all that fun stuff that you guys are used to. I appreciate you letting me ramble about Nikola Jokic for a little bit. I know it has nothing to do with CSU, but we're all sports fans here. I think it's fun to stray away from the typical show every now and then. We mostly keep it on track. Anyways, I'm going to stop rambling now. That's all I've got for you today. Much love, y'all. Always proud to be. Peace.
We all silly like the mayor.